In the Chun family, there was never any question about who mattered more. My brother David was born first, and in our traditional Chinese-American household, that meant everything. The eldest son. The one who would carry on the family name. The one who received the lion's share of attention, resources, and expectations. I came along 18 months later. Maya, the daughter. Useful for helping around the house, expected to be respectful and quiet, but never the center of the family universe. Our grandfather, Chun Wei, had built something remarkable in America. He'd immigrated from Taiwan in 1972 with $300 in his pocket and an engineering degree that American companies barely recognized. He worked 3 jobs, saved obsessively, and eventually started his own small manufacturing company. By the time I was born, Grandpa had transformed that small operation into a thriving business with contracts across the Southeast. But Grandpa sold the business when I was 12, right before the market crashed in 2008. Everyone thought he was crazy. Why sell during such uncertain times? But Grandpa had a gift for timing. He sold for $4.2 million, paid off every debt he had, and invested carefully in real estate when prices bottomed out. By 2015, Grandpa owned 4 rental properties in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, near the university. A beautiful craftsman-style main house where he lived, worth about $850,000. 3 smaller rental homes he'd renovated himself, each worth $300,000 to $400,000. Total portfolio value, approximately $2.1 million, plus another $900,000 in investments and savings. For a self-made immigrant who'd started with nothing, it was an empire. And everyone in the family assumed it would go to David. David certainly assumed it. He was studying business at UNC, living rent-free in one of Grandpa's rental properties, driving a car Grandpa had bought him. He talked constantly about his plans for expanding the family real estate portfolio once he inherited. He'd bring girlfriends to family dinners and gesture around Grandpa's house like he already owned it. "When this is mine," he'd say casually, "I'm thinking about converting the basement into a home theater." Mom would beam. Dad would nod approvingly. Grandpa would say nothing. I was different with Grandpa. I didn't see him as a walking inheritance. I saw him as the most interesting person in my family. While David was out partying at UNC, I was driving over to Grandpa's house every Sunday. We'd drink tea in his kitchen, and he'd tell me stories about Taiwan, about his early years in America, about the discrimination he'd faced and overcome. He taught me about real estate, about how to evaluate properties, about the difference between assets and liabilities. "Most people work for money their whole lives," he'd say in his accented English. "Smart people make money work for them." When I was applying to colleges, everyone expected me to stay local, maybe attend UNC like David. Instead, I got accepted to Carnegie Mellon for architecture with a partial scholarship. "That's too far away," Mom said immediately. "And too expensive." "We can't afford to help you much," Dad added. "We're already supporting David's education." David smirked. "Maybe community college would be more realistic for you." I was prepared to take out massive loans. But Grandpa pulled me aside after that family dinner. "How much do you need?" he asked simply. "Grandpa, no." "How much?" We sat down with the calculator. Tuition, room and board, expenses. For years. Approximately $120,000 total after my scholarship. Grandpa wrote me a check for $30,000. "For your first year. Work hard, prove yourself, and we'll talk about the rest." I cried. He patted my shoulder awkwardly. "You have vision, Maya. You see things others don't see. That's valuable. Don't waste it." I didn't. I worked 2 part-time jobs, kept my grades perfect, and every year, Grandpa quietly helped with tuition. By the time I graduated, he'd given me $95,000 total. It was a loan, he insisted. I'd pay him back when I could. David never knew. Mom and Dad never knew. It was between Grandpa and me. After graduation, I got hired by a prestigious architecture firm in Raleigh. I lived in a modest apartment, drove a 7-year-old Toyota, and sent Grandpa $500 a month to start paying back the loan. He accepted the first payment. After that, he started returning the checks with notes. "Invest this instead. Build your own foundation." David, meanwhile, had graduated with a business degree and mediocre grades. He'd gotten a job at a mid-level marketing firm where he spent more time networking at happy hours than actually working. He still lived rent-free in Grandpa's rental property, still drove the car Grandpa maintained, still talked about his future plans for the family properties. But something was changing with Grandpa. He was slowing down, getting forgetful. At 78, the physical work of maintaining rental properties was becoming too much. I started coming by more often. First once a week, then twice, then almost every evening after work. I'd help with repairs, handle tenant communications, deal with maintenance issues. Grandpa would sit in his chair and direct me, teaching me everything he knew. David visited maybe once a month, usually when he needed something. One evening in early 2020, Grandpa asked me to meet him at his attorney's office. My heart sank. I thought he was sick, dying, preparing his final affairs. Instead, he wanted to talk about trust structures. "I'm not dying yet," he said with a slight smile. "But I'm old enough to be realistic. I want to make sure my assets go to the right person." "Grandpa, you should leave everything to David," I said automatically. "He's the eldest son. It's traditional." "Tradition," Grandpa interrupted, "is useful when it serves wisdom, not when it rewards laziness." He slid a document across the table. "I'm creating an irrevocable trust. All 4 properties, all investments, everything. It transfers to you immediately, not when I die. You'll own it now." I stared at him, shocked. "But David sees me as a bank account," Grandpa said quietly. "You see me as a person. David wants what I've built. You understand why I built it. There's a difference." "Mom and Dad will never forgive this," I whispered. "They'll never know," Grandpa said. "Not yet. The trust transfers ownership privately. No public records, no announcements. Let your brother keep assuming. Let your parents keep planning. When the time comes, the truth will reveal itself." His attorney, a sharp woman named Patricia Wong who'd worked with Grandpa for 20 years, nodded. "The structure is completely legal and ironclad. An irrevocable trust means exactly that. Once executed, it cannot be undone, contested, or challenged. The assets belong to Maya immediately." We signed the papers in March 2020. Property deeds transferred. Investment accounts retitled. Everything moved into the Chin family trust with me as the sole beneficiary and trustee. Grandpa made me promise not to tell anyone. "Watch how they treat you," he said. "Watch how David acts when he thinks he's inheriting everything. Watch how your parents behave. That will tell you everything you need to know." So I watched. And what I saw broke my heart and hardened my resolve at the same time. For the next 3 years, I lived a double life. Publicly, I was Maya Chin, junior architect at a Raleigh firm, making $62,000 a year. I lived in my modest apartment, drove my old Toyota, dressed in affordable clothes from Target. To my family, I was doing fine, respectable but unremarkable. Privately, I was a property owner with a growing real estate portfolio worth over $3 million. The 4 Chapel Hill properties generated $8,400 in combined monthly rent. That's $100,800 a year in passive income before expenses. After property taxes, insurance, maintenance, and repairs, I was netting about $68,000 annually. I could have quit my job and lived off the rental income. Instead, I kept working and reinvested everything. I renovated the rental properties one by one, increasing their values. I took Grandpa's investment accounts and diversified them more aggressively. I studied everything I could about real estate investment, property management, and wealth building. Grandpa watched it all, with quiet pride. We'd sit in his kitchen every Sunday, going over numbers, discussing strategy. He was teaching me his final lessons. "Most people who inherit money lose it within 10 years, he'd say. Because they didn't build it. They didn't learn the discipline. But you're learning while I'm still here to teach you." David, meanwhile, was spiraling. He'd been fired from 2 jobs for attendance issues, code for showing up hungover. He'd moved from the Chapel Hill rental property to an expensive apartment in Durham that he could barely afford, trying to maintain an image of success he didn't actually have. But he kept telling everyone about his inheritance plans. At family dinners, he'd talk about diversifying the portfolio and leveraging the equity once Grandpa's properties were his. He downloaded real estate apps and would show Mom and Dad listings of luxury homes he planned to buy with the inheritance money. Mom and Dad encouraged this fantasy. They saw David's unemployment and financial struggles as temporary setbacks. Once he inherits Grandpa's estate, he'll be set, Mom would say. He'll have the capital to really make something of himself. I'd sit there silently, knowing the truth. The breaking point came in late 2022. Grandpa had a minor stroke, scary, but not catastrophic. He recovered well, but it was a wake-up call. He was 80 years old. Time was finite. David visited him once in the hospital, stayed 20 minutes, and spent most of it on his phone. I took a week off work and stayed with Grandpa around the clock. When he came home, I moved into his guest room for a month to make sure he was okay. We'd sit together in the evenings, watching old Chinese films and talking about everything and nothing. "You've been good to me," he said one night. "Better than I deserved. You've given me everything, Grandpa," I said, my voice thick. "Everything I am, I owe to you." He shook his head. "I gave you opportunity. You built everything yourself. There's a difference." By 2023, the properties had appreciated significantly. The Chapel Hill market was booming. The main house was now worth $1.1 million. The 3 rentals were worth $400,000 to $500,000 each. Combined with the investment accounts I'd grown to $1.2 million, the total estate value was approximately $3.4 million. All of it legally mine. None of it known to my family. Grandpa passed away peacefully in his sleep in August 2023. He was 81 years old. I found him in the morning when I came by with his favorite breakfast, pork buns from the Asian market. I sat next to his bed and cried. Not just for his death, but for the fact that he'd been the only person in my family who'd ever truly seen me. Grandpa's funeral was everything he would have hated. Loud, showy, packed with relatives who'd barely visited him in his final years. David wore an expensive suit he definitely couldn't afford and played the role of grieving grandson with practiced precision. He was such an inspiration, David told everyone. A brilliant businessman. I learned everything from him. You learned nothing, I thought. You weren't there. Mom cried dramatically. Dad gave a eulogy about family legacy and honoring tradition. My aunts and uncles speculated quietly about the inheritance. I wore a simple black dress and said almost nothing. My grief was private, real, too deep for performance. 3 weeks after the funeral, Patricia Wong called a family meeting at her office for the reading of Chen Wei's will. This was the moment Grandpa had predicted. He deliberately left a will, a simple document that would be read publicly. But the will was essentially meaningless because everything had already been transferred through the irrevocable trust years ago. The will was theater. The trust was reality. I knew this. Patricia knew this. No one else did. David lunged halfway across the table. That's impossible. That will just said. The will, Patricia interrupted calmly, is a public document required for probate. It distributes whatever assets remained in Mr. Chen's personal name at the time of his death, which, in this case, was approximately $15,000 in his personal checking account and various personal possessions. She pulled out another document. The real estate properties, all 4 of them, transferred to the Chen Family Trust on March 12, 2020. The trust names Maya Chen as the sole beneficiary and trustee. Here are the recorded deeds, filed with Orange County. She laid out 4 property deeds, each showing transfer dates from 2020. That's not legal, David shouted. He couldn't just give away everything without telling us. He absolutely could, Patricia said. And did. An irrevocable trust is a legal instrument specifically designed for this purpose. Once executed, it cannot be undone, contested, or modified. Mom's face had gone pale. There must be a mistake. He wouldn't have. There's no mistake, I said quietly. It was the first time I'd spoken. Grandpa transferred everything to me 3.5 years ago. I've been managing the properties, collecting the rent, paying all expenses ever since. David stared at me like I'd grown a second head. You've been managing the properties? Who do you think fixed the leaking roof on the Martin Street rental last year? I asked calmly. Who handled the tenant dispute on Franklin Street? Who coordinated the kitchen renovation on the Rosemary Street property? Patricia pulled out more documents. Here are 3 years of property tax returns, all paid by Maya Chun as trustee. Here are insurance policies, all in the trust's name. Here are rental income records showing consistent deposits to the trust's bank account. She kept laying out paper after paper. The evidence was overwhelming, undeniable. The current appraised value of the 4 properties, Patricia continued, is approximately $2.6 million. The investment accounts and savings, which were also transferred to the trust, currently total approximately $1.2 million. Combined estate value, $3.8 million. The number hung in the air like a bomb. "That's mine," David yelled, standing up so violently his chair tipped backward. "That was supposed to be mine." Everyone knew it was supposed to be mine. Everyone assumed. I corrected quietly. "Grandpa never promised you anything. He let me live in his property rent-free for years." David shouted. "He bought me a car. He gave you opportunities," I said, my voice still calm but harder now. "You wasted them. You got fired from 2 jobs. You barely visited him. You saw him as a future inheritance, not as a person." "That's not true." David's face was bright red, spittle flying. "I loved Grandpa." "When was his birthday?" I asked simply. David froze. "What?" "Grandpa's birthday." "What day was it?" Silence. David's mouth opened and closed. "September 23rd, I said. "You didn't know that, did you? How about his favorite food? His favorite movie? The name of his best friend from Taiwan?" More silence. "I knew all of those things," I said, "because I spent time with him. Real time. Not just showing up when you needed something." Mom finally found her voice, and it was full of venom. "You manipulated a sick old man. You convinced him to cut out his own grandson. Grandpa was sharp until the day he died." I interrupted. "He made this decision 3.5 years ago, long before he got sick. He made it because he saw clearly what everyone in this room refused to see." "And what's that?" Dad demanded. "That David is entitled, lazy, and financially irresponsible," I said flatly. "If Grandpa had left him this estate, David would have sold it all within a year to pay off his debts and fund his lifestyle. The properties Grandpa spent 40 years building would be gone. The legacy would be destroyed." "You don't know that," David shouted. "Really?" I pulled out my phone and opened a document. "Should I read your current credit card debt out loud? The $47,000 you owe across 6 cards? The car lease you're 3 months behind on? The eviction notice from your Durham apartment?" David went very, very still. "I hired a financial investigator," I said calmly. "I want to know exactly what would happen to Grandpa's estate if David inherited it. The answer is, it would be liquidated and destroyed within 18 months. Patricia pulled out another document, one that made my stomach clench even though I knew it was coming. "There's one more thing we need to discuss," Patricia said quietly. "In 2019, someone used David Chen's driver's license and social security number to apply for a home equity line of credit against Mr. Chen's primary residence." The room went silent. The application was denied because Mr. Chenwei flagged it as fraudulent. But the attempt was documented. All eyes turned to David. That wasn't," David stammered. "I was just checking to see what equity was available. It wasn't fraud, I was—" "You tried to borrow against a house you didn't own," I said, my voice cold. "Without permission. That's the definition of fraud." Mom's hand flew to her mouth. Dad looked like he might be sick. "It was a mistake," David shouted desperately. "I was in financial trouble and I panicked. I wasn't actually going to." "Grandpa knew," I said. "He knew about the credit card debt, the job losses, and the fraudulent loan application. That's when he decided to create the trust. That's when he realized you'd destroy everything he built." I stood up slowly. The room felt too small, too hot, too full of people I'd once called family. "Grandpa gave you every advantage," I said, looking at David. "Free housing for years. A car. Connections. Opportunities. You squandered all of it. Then you tried to steal from him." I turned to Mom and Dad. "And you enabled it. You praised him for nothing, excused every failure, and told him he deserved an inheritance he never earned." "How dare you?" Mom whispered, tears streaming down her face. How dare you judge us like this? I'm not judging, I said tiredly. I'm just done. Done being invisible while David gets celebrated for mediocrity. Done being the dutiful daughter who never asks for anything while he gets everything. Done pretending this is a loving family when it only loved one of us. Patricia stood up beside me. The trust documents are final and legal. Any attempt to contest them will fail and will result in legal fees that I assure you, none of you can afford. The estate belongs to Maya. That's not negotiable. She handed business cards around the table. If anyone has legal questions, you can contact my office during business hours. But I advise you to accept the reality of this situation and move forward. David was staring at the table, his face ashen. Mom was crying. Dad looked lost. My aunt and uncle were trying to disappear into their chairs. I picked up my purse. For what it's worth, Grandpa did leave you something, David. He looked up, desperate hope flickering across his face. He left you an example of what happens when you take everything for granted and give nothing back. I hope you learn from it. I walked toward the door. Patricia walked with me. Behind us, David found his voice one last time. You're going to regret this. You're going to need this family someday, and we won't be there. I turned back, my hand on the doorknob. I stopped needing this family a long time ago, I said quietly. I just didn't realize it until Grandpa showed me what real love looks like. And then I left. I drove straight to Grandpa's house, my house, and sat in the driveway for 20 minutes, shaking. My phone started ringing immediately. Mom. Dad. David. My aunt. Numbers I didn't recognize. I turned it off. Patricia texted. You did beautifully. He would be so proud. I sat in Grandpa's kitchen, my kitchen, and cried. Not sad tears, exactly. Release tears. Freedom tears. Over the next weeks, the family implosion was spectacular. David's financial situation collapsed completely. With no inheritance coming, his creditors closed in. His car was repossessed. He was evicted from his Durham apartment and had to move back in with Mom and Dad at age 31. Mom and Dad, suddenly responsible for supporting their adult son, were furious. Not at David, of course. At me. Mom left a voicemail. I hope you're happy. Your brother is suffering because of your greed. Dad sent an email. You've destroyed this family. Your grandfather would be ashamed. I didn't respond to either. What I did do was change every lock on every property. I hired a property management company to handle the rentals, removing myself from day-to-day operations. I consulted with Patricia about protective orders in case David tried anything stupid. And I kept building. I sold the smallest rental property for $420,000 and reinvested the proceeds into a promising mixed-use development project near downtown Raleigh. I renovated the main house, updating the kitchen and bathrooms while preserving its character. I increased rents on the remaining rental properties to market rates. The estate value grew to $3.9 million. My cousin Lisa, who'd been quiet during the will reading, called me 2 weeks later. I just want you to know, she said, that was the bravest thing I've ever seen anyone do. Thank you, I whispered. My parents are saying terrible things about you, she continued. I just want you to know I don't believe any of it. I remember how you were with Grandpa. I remember the rest of us barely visiting while you were there every week. We talked for an hour. It turned out Lisa had her own issues with family dynamics, her own feelings of being overlooked and undervalued. Want to come see the house? I offered. Grandpa would have wanted you to visit. She came the next weekend. We sat in the kitchen where Grandpa had taught me everything, drinking tea and talking about building lives separate from family expectations. 1 month after the will reading, David showed up at the main house. I saw him through the window, standing on the porch, looking defeated. I almost didn't answer, but something made me open the door. What do you want? I asked, not unkindly. I need money, he said flatly. No preamble. No apology. I'm drowning. Credit cards, debt collectors, I need help. No, I said simply. You have millions, he shouted. Millions that should have been mine. You owe me. I owe you nothing, I interrupted. Grandpa gave you years of free housing, opportunities, chances. You wasted all of it. That's not my problem to fix. Please, he said, and for the first time, I saw real fear in his eyes. "I'm your brother." "You were my brother when you told everyone I was getting nothing," I said quietly. "You were my brother when you tried to commit fraud against Grandpa. You were my brother during all those years you barely acknowledged I existed. Where was family loyalty then?" He had no answer. "Get off my property," I said. "And don't come back." He left. I locked the door. And I felt nothing. A year after Grandpa's death, I stood in the main house living room, surrounded by moving boxes. I decided to move in permanently, leaving my Raleigh apartment behind. This house, Grandpa's house, now truly mine, would be my home. The estate had continued to grow. The mixed-use development investment had paid off spectacularly, returning 40% on my investment. The remaining rental properties were thriving. Total estate value, $4.2 million. But more than the money, I'd built something else, a life that was authentically mine. At work, I'd been promoted to senior architect. I was leading major projects, mentoring younger designers, building a reputation for innovative, sustainable design. I'd reconnected with cousins who'd been pushed to the margins of family dynamics, building chosen family relationships based on mutual respect rather than obligation. And I'd started a scholarship fund in Grandpa's name, helping first-generation Asian American students pursue degrees in architecture and engineering. The first recipient was a young woman from Taiwan whose story reminded me so much of Grandpa's early struggles. Mom and Dad reached out once, 6 months after the will reading. They wanted to discuss reconciliation and rebuild the family. I agreed to meet them for coffee. They spent the first 20 minutes explaining how hard things had been, David's struggles, their own stress, the embarrassment within the extended family. "We think it's time to move past this," Mom said. "Family is family." "What would moving past it look like?" I asked. "Well," Dad said carefully, "maybe you could help David get back on his feet. Alone, or maybe hire him to help manage the properties." I stood up. "This meeting is over." "Maya, please." "You haven't apologized," I said quietly. "Not once. You haven't acknowledged how you treated me for 30 years. You haven't recognized that Grandpa made the right choice. You just want access to money." I put cash on the table for my coffee. "When you're ready to have a real conversation, one that starts with acknowledging how you failed me as parents, call me. Until then, don't contact me." I walked away. They didn't call. 3 months ago, David got a job. A real job with benefits and accountability. According to Lisa, he was actually showing up consistently, trying to rebuild his life. I was glad for him. But I felt nothing else, no obligation to help, no guilt for having what he thought should be his. As I unpacked boxes in the main house, my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Is this Maya Chen?" a woman's voice asked. "Yes. My name is Jennifer Park. I received the Chen Family Scholarship this year. I just wanted to call and say thank you. I'm the first person in my family to go to college, and this scholarship made it possible." My eyes filled with tears. "I'm so glad. I managed." "The application mentioned Chun Wei's story," Jennifer continued. "About coming to America with nothing and building something remarkable. That's my parents' story too. This scholarship, it's not just money. It's believing that people like us belong in these spaces." After we hung up, I sat in Grandpa's favorite chair and looked around the house he'd built with his own hands. He'd given me more than property or investments. He'd given me proof that I was worth something, that my quiet loyalty and steady presence had value, that showing up mattered more than being loud. In a family that had always chosen David, the charismatic, entitled, careless David, Grandpa had chosen me. And in doing so, he taught me to choose myself. I didn't regret how I'd handled the will reading. I didn't regret walking away from family members who only valued me when they wanted something. I didn't regret building a life on the foundation Grandpa had given me. Because the greatest inheritance wasn't the $4.2 million estate. It was learning that I deserved to be chosen. That I was worthy of investment. That my value didn't depend on my family's approval. Grandpa had seen me when no one else did. And through his final gift, both the trust and the lesson it taught, he'd helped me see myself. I stood up, walked to the window, and looked out at the property I now owned completely. The trees Grandpa had planted. the garden he'd tended, the life he'd built from nothing. And I smiled, knowing that I was building something just as real, just as valuable, just as permanent. Not despite my family's rejection, but because Grandpa had taught me that some people are worth believing in, worth investing in, worth choosing. And I was one of them.